My name is Megan, 33 years old, and a certified fraud examiner who catches financial criminals for a living. Yet the most elaborate con I ever uncovered was masterminded by my own mother. I flew 12 exhausting hours from an international assignment to attend my brother Brandon's wedding. But as I stepped up to the venue, my mother physically blocked the entrance. "Go outside," she hissed, snatching the gift from my hands. "Only family is allowed, and frankly, you were never invited." 2 days later, she called to casually demand how I planned to pay the $65,000 venue bill she had fraudulently put in my name. I simply laughed and told her I had already reported the stolen identity to federal authorities. The sharp gasp on the other end of the line was absolute perfection. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your boundaries. The freezing mountain air of Aspen, Colorado, whipped across my face as I stepped out of the luxury town car. I endured a grueling 12-hour flight from an audit job in London running purely on black coffee. My brother Brandon was getting married to Jasmine, a rising lifestyle influencer. I walked up the cobblestone path toward the grand entrance of the Silver Peak Resort. The place was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the rustic wooden beams, and a live string quartet played softly in the background. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos carried trays of champagne to guests already mingling in the grand lobby. I smoothed down my tailored navy suit, feeling a bit out of place among the flowing designer gowns, but I was happy to be there for my brother. As I approached the heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom, my mother Brenda suddenly stepped out from behind a towering floral arrangement. She planted herself firmly in the center of the doorway. Her eyes darted up and down my outfit with clear disgust. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Her voice kept low but dripping with venom. I held up the silver-wrapped box in my hands. "I am here for my brother's wedding," I replied, keeping my tone completely even. "I RSVP'd 3 months ago." My mother let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She reached forward and aggressively yanked the silver box right out of my hands. "Did you honestly think we wanted you here?" she asked, shaking her head. "Jasmine has been planning this winter wonderland aesthetic for over a year. She has high-profile sponsors and thousands of followers watching her live updates today. Your stiff corporate energy completely ruins the vibe. You are far too rigid, Megan. You just do not fit in with our crowd." I stared at her, absorbing the sheer cruelty of her words. My mother was standing in a venue that cost more than most people made in a year, wearing a silk gown, and telling me I was not good enough to watch my own brother get married. Before I could respond, the heavy oak doors swung open again. Jasmine stepped out into the hallway. My soon-to-be sister-in-law looked absolutely stunning in a custom-beaded white gown. Her dark skin practically glowed under the warm chandelier light. But the moment her eyes landed on me, her beautiful features twisted into a condescending smirk. "Oh, good, you dropped off the gift," Jasmine said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. She looked at my mother and sighed dramatically. "I told Brandon it was a huge risk having her around today. I really need everything to be absolutely perfect for the cameras, and we just cannot have awkward family tension ruining the background shots." Jasmine turned her gaze back to me, looking down her nose despite being shorter than I was. "Thank you for dropping off a gift for your betters, Megan. Now be a dear and leave before the real photographers arrive." My mother nodded in agreement, clutching the gift I had bought with my own hard-earned money. "Go back to your spreadsheets, Megan," my mother sneered. "Let the real family enjoy this beautiful day." I stood there for a long moment. I did not scream. I did not cry. My career had taught me how to detach from emotional manipulation. I looked my mother dead in the eye, gave Jasmine a tight, cold smile, and simply turned around. I walked back down the cobblestone path, unaware that the real nightmare was only just beginning. 2 days later, I was back in my Chicago penthouse, nursing a mug of black coffee while staring out at the gray skyline. The sting of the Aspen trip still lingered, but I had buried myself in work to ignore it. As a fraud examiner, My days were spent unraveling complex financial webs and catching corporate thieves. Numbers made sense. Spreadsheets did not lie or play favorites. Family, on the other hand, was an entirely different equation. I was in the middle of reviewing a massive forensic audit for a client when my phone buzzed on the glass desk. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I stared at the screen for a solid minute, letting it ring. A part of me thought she might actually be calling to apologize. Maybe the high of the wedding had worn off and reality had set in. Maybe she realized how unhinged it was to turn her own daughter away at the door. Against my better judgment, I tapped the screen and put her on speakerphone. "Hello, Brenda," I said, skipping the usual pleasantries. "Megan, finally." She sighed, her tone completely casual, as if we had just spoken yesterday about the weather. "Listen, the resort just sent over the final invoice for the weekend. They charged a premium for the extra champagne Jasmine ordered, plus the extended hours for the string quartet. The total came out to exactly $65,000. So how do you want to handle the payment? Will you be wiring it directly, or should I have them run your card on file?" The absolute audacity of the question short-circuited my brain for a second. I took a breath, making sure I had heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "I flew all the way to Colorado just for you to physically block me from entering the venue. You told me I was not family. You told me to leave. And now you are calling to ask how I plan to pay for the party I was banned from attending." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," my mother snapped, the casual tone vanishing instantly. "You are making this a bigger deal than it needs to be." Jasmine was stressed. The cameras were rolling. You know how she gets about her aesthetic. But you are still Brandon's sister and you owe him this. You make well into the six figures, Megan. You have no husband, no kids, and you just hoard your money in that fancy apartment. Paying for the venue is the least you can do for your family. "I am not paying a single cent for a wedding I did not attend," I replied firmly. "Do not call me about this again." I reached to press the end call button, but her next words stopped my hand dead in the air. "Well, it is too late for that," she said, letting out a self-satisfied little chuckle. "I already gave them your information. You are paying for it whether you like it or not." My blood ran cold. The analytical part of my brain, the part trained to detect financial anomalies, instantly kicked into overdrive. "What do you mean you gave them my information?" I demanded, gripping the edge of my desk. "I used your backup details," she stated proudly, as if she had just found a clever loophole. "You know, from when you used to live at home. I still have your old Social Security card copy and the details from your first bank account. When the resort asked for a guarantor for the master account, I just put your name down. The contract was sent to that old email address of yours, the one I set up for you in high school. I just logged in and clicked accept. It was incredibly simple. The event is already billed under your credit profile, so you might as well just pay it before it ruins your precious credit score." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was a laugh born of pure disbelief. My mother was narcissistic, manipulative, and deeply flawed, but I never pegged her as a literal criminal. I thought she was bluffing. I thought this was just another one of her desperate, unhinged attempts to bully me into opening my wallet for her golden child. "You are out of your mind, Brenda," I chuckled, shaking my head. "You cannot just click accept on a $65,000 invoice. That is not how legally binding contracts work. You are trying to scare me, and it is honestly pathetic." Right as the words left my mouth, my phone vibrated against the glass desk. A push notification illuminated the screen. It was an urgent alert from my primary banking app. I tapped it open, still smiling at my mother's ridiculous bluff. The smile vanished the second the page loaded. There, in bold red letters across my screen, was the notification. "Joint loan application approved. Total amount $65,000. I stared at the glowing red letters on my screen, my mind racing to process the sheer audacity of what I was looking at. $65,000. This was not a simple charge on an existing credit card. This was a brand new line of credit, a joint loan taken out against my pristine financial profile. I pressed the phone back to my ear, my knuckles turning white. "Brenda!" What exactly did you do? I demanded, my voice dropping an octave. Oh, please do not start using that tone with me. She sighed dramatically, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. The resort required a guarantor. Brandon is between jobs right now, and Jasmine is building her brand, so they do not have the liquid assets or the credit history to secure the master account. Jasmine expects a certain lifestyle, and Brandon promised he could provide it. I simply stepped in and solved the problem. You did not solve a problem, I snapped, pacing across the hardwood floor of my living room. You committed financial fraud. You applied for a loan in my name without my consent. That is a crime. A crime, she scoffed loudly. Stop being so hysterical. You are Family Megan. Family helps family. As the older sister, it is your duty to make sure your brother is taken care of. He needed this wedding to secure Jasmine. Do you have any idea how important her image is? If they had to downgrade to a cheaper venue, she would have been a laughingstock online. You have plenty of money sitting around doing nothing. It is incredibly selfish of you to hoard your wealth when your own brother is trying to start his life. He is 30 years old, Brenda, I shot back. He is a grown man playing pretend with money that does not belong to him. And you are an enabler. Cancel it right now. Call the bank and tell them you made a mistake, or I will. I will do no such thing, she replied, her tone turning icy and venomous. The loan is approved and the money has already been dispersed to the resort. The wedding is paid for. The ink is dry. If you try to back out now, you will be the one destroying your own credit. Grow up, Megan. Pay the bill like a good sister and stop embarrassing us. The line went dead. She actually hung up on me. I stood in the center of my apartment, the silence ringing in my ears. She really thought she had trapped me in a corner. She believed the threat of a ruined credit score would force me into submission. For a fraction of a second, the old conditioned part of me wanted to panic. The daughter who was raised to absorb the family burdens felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. But that girl had died a long time ago. In her place was a 33-year-old certified fraud examiner who dismantled complex embezzlement schemes before breakfast. I threw my phone onto the sofa and marched straight to my home office. I fired up my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I bypassed my standard banking app and logged directly into the bank-secured desktop portal. I navigated through the labyrinth of account settings and loan dashboards until I found it. The newly minted $65,000 joint loan agreement. I downloaded the PDF and opened it. There it was. My name, my date of birth, my social security number all neatly typed into the borrower section. But what made my blood boil was the signature line. A perfectly generated digital signature spelled out my name legally, binding me to a predatory interest rate and a 5-year repayment plan for a party I was banned from attending. But digital signatures are never just signatures. They leave a trail. Every electronic document contains an audit log, a digital footprint that tracks exactly when, where, and how a document was signed. I scrolled down to the final page of the PDF to examine the certificate of completion. I scanned the IP addresses first. The document was initiated from the resort in Colorado, but the signature was executed from an IP address I instantly recognized. It was the router at my parents' house. She had not even tried to cover her tracks. Then I looked at the email address used for the two-factor authentication. A notification of the loan and a request for signature had been sent to an email account to verify my identity. I stared at the address printed on the screen, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. It was an old AOL email address, an account my mother had created for me when I was in middle school, long before I had my own smartphone. I had not used that email in over 15 years. I did not even remember the security questions to access it. But my mother still had the password. She had deliberately routed the bank verification to a dead inbox only she controlled. She had intercepted the bank alerts, bypassed the security measures, and signed her own daughter into massive debt. This was calculated, premeditated fraud executed by a woman who thought she was untouchable. But she forgot what I did for a living. I reached for my phone again, my mind already formulating a battle plan. I did not waste a single second wallowing in anger or self-pity. I immediately picked up my phone and firmly dialed the billing department for the Silver Peak Resort in Aspen. A polite coordinator answered. I introduced myself and explained in clear terms that the $65,000 payment they had processed was funded through a fraudulent loan. I demanded they reverse the charge. The coordinator was sympathetic but firm. She explained that the funds had cleared and the event had already taken place. Our services were rendered in full, she explained gently. The catering, the staff, the venue rentals were all executed. We cannot absorb a massive loss because of an internal family dispute. She advised me to contact my financial institution. I thanked her and hung up. Establishing a timeline of immediate dispute was crucial for a fraud investigation. Next, I called the dedicated fraud department of my primary banking institution. After patiently navigating the automated menus, I was connected to a resolution specialist named Greg. I gave him my credentials and explained the situation. I told him my mother had used my old social security details and a dormant email address to digitally forge my signature on a joint loan. I asked him to immediately flag the account for identity theft and freeze the disbursement. Greg typed away on his keyboard for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his tone lacked the urgency I expected. "I am sorry, Megan," Greg said, his voice laced with practiced corporate apathy. "I am looking at the audit trail for the electronic signature. The IP address used to finalize this loan originates from a residential address in suburban Chicago. According to our records, this was listed as your permanent mailing address up until 5 years ago." I took a deep breath. I told him I had not lived at that address in 5 years and that the house belonged to my parents. "That is exactly the issue," Greg replied smoothly. "Because the device location matches a known family address and the secondary applicant is a direct relative, our system does not automatically classify this as third-party malicious fraud. The bank views this as a civil family dispute." "I am a certified fraud examiner," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am telling you on a recorded line that my identity was stolen. It does not matter if the thief shares my DNA." Greg remained completely unmoved. "Without an official police report and a federal identity theft affidavit, we cannot freeze the account or cancel the loan," he stated flatly. "The funds have been disbursed. Furthermore, you are listed as the primary guarantor. The first payment of $1,400 is due in exactly 30 days. If that payment is not received, it will be reported to the credit bureaus as delinquent, impacting your credit score. I suggest you work this out with your family." I demanded to speak to his manager. Greg simply sighed. "My manager will tell you the exact same thing," he replied. "You need to file a police report against your mother if you want us to take action. Most people are not willing to send their own mother to prison, so they usually just settle the debt." I ended the call without another word. He thought I would cave to family pressure. He was dead wrong. The bank wanted official federal documents. They wanted police involvement. I was more than happy to provide exactly what they asked for. I opened my laptop and navigated straight to the Federal Trade Commission website to begin the formal legal process. I was just about to begin typing my official affidavit when my phone screen lit up. The loud ringtone echoed through my quiet living room. It was an incoming FaceTime call from my brother Brandon. I narrowed my eyes in disgust. I pressed the green accept button and propped the phone up against my coffee mug, keeping my face entirely blank. The screen slowly adjusted to the blinding bright sunlight, revealing Brandon and Jasmine lounging comfortably in a lavish, private beachfront cabana. Behind them, the crystal-clear waters of Maui stretched out to the horizon. Jasmine looked absolutely radiant, her dark skin glowing beautifully against a pristine white designer swimsuit, a massive tropical drink resting casually in her perfectly manicured hand. They were staying at an exclusive $2,000 a night luxury resort, living out a wild fantasy vacation funded entirely by my stolen identity. And they both wore massive glowing smiles ready to rub their supposed victory right in my face. "Megan, oh my goodness, hi!" Jasmine cooed loudly into the microphone. She held her left hand up to her face, strategically resting her chin on her knuckles so her massive engagement ring took up half the screen. The diamond caught the bright Hawaiian sun, throwing tiny rainbows across the camera lens. "We were just talking about you. We felt so terrible that you decided to leave the wedding early. It was truly the most magical day of my entire life." I stared blankly at the screen. Decided to leave early. That was an interesting way to describe being physically blocked at the door by my mother. I did not say a word. I just let her keep talking, knowing that grifters always talk too much when they think they have won. "It is such a shame you are always so focused on your spreadsheets and your little audits." Jasmine continued, taking a long sip from her oversized tropical drink. "You really need to learn how to relax, Megan. Honestly, I think that is why you are still single. You are just this bitter single workaholic who cannot stand to see other people happy and in love. You project all that negative corporate energy onto your own family." Brandon was telling me how you always try to control everyone with your money. But family is about sharing blessings, not hoarding them in some empty penthouse. I kept my expression completely neutral. She was regurgitating the exact same toxic rhetoric my mother had been feeding her. Jasmine had convinced herself she was the victim of a jealous, lonely older sister, completely ignoring the reality that her entire fairy tale life was currently being bankrolled by a felony. Brandon leaned into the frame, adjusting his expensive designer sunglasses. He looked completely relaxed, entirely unbothered by the fact that he was actively participating in massive financial fraud. "Look, Meg, just pay the bill and stop causing so much unnecessary drama," Brandon said, sounding annoyed that he even had to address the situation. "Mom handled all the paperwork, so you did not even have to do anything. You make ridiculous money for sitting at a desk all day. 65 grand is pocket change to you. Jasmine deserves the best, and as the man of the house, it is my job to give it to her. So just call the bank, authorize the payment plan, and let it go. We are trying to enjoy our honeymoon here." He was trying to sound authoritative, trying to play the role of the wealthy provider for his new wife. But his absolute financial incompetence was about to be his downfall. "By the way," Brandon added casually, leaning back against the plush cabana pillows, "do not freak out when you see the hold on your platinum card. The resort here in Maui needed a credit card on file for incidentals and room service, and my daily limit was giving me issues. Mom gave me the numbers to your account as a backup. We only booked a week, so it will not be that much. Consider it your wedding gift to us since you did not leave one at the venue." A sharp electric jolt of clarity hit me. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing out loud. Brandon was incredibly stupid. He had just confessed on a recorded FaceTime call to possessing and using stolen credit card numbers across state lines. The $65,000 loan was originated in Illinois by my mother, but Brandon, using my physical credit card numbers in Hawaii, elevated the situation to a multi-state federal offense. He had just handed me the exact piece of evidence I needed to bypass the civil dispute loophole the bank had tried to trap me in. "Are you listening to me?" Brandon snapped, misinterpreting my silence as submission. "Just pay it, Megan. Stop being so incredibly selfish." Jasmine giggled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Leave her alone, babe. She is probably just calculating her next spreadsheet." I looked at the two of them. They were so incredibly arrogant, so deeply convinced that the rules did not apply to them, because family loyalty would always shield them from the consequences. They thought my silence was defeat. I smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile that did not reach my eyes. I did not yell. I did not threaten them. I did not waste my breath explaining federal law to a couple of thieves. "Enjoy the beach, Jasmine." I said, my voice completely smooth and even. "It is the last luxury you will see." I reached forward and ended the call. The screen went black. I immediately opened a new tab on my browser and typed in the web address for the Federal Trade Commission. I clicked on the portal for identity theft. It was time to go nuclear. The screen of my laptop glowed in the dimming light of my apartment. I navigated the Federal Trade Commission website with the muscle memory of a professional. Most victims of family financial abuse hesitate at this stage. They cry, they bargain, and they try to handle it internally to protect the very people who betrayed them. They worry about ruining holidays or tearing the family apart. I did not feel a single ounce of hesitation. My family had already torn themselves away from me the moment my mother blocked me from entering that wedding venue. I clicked on the official identity theft report portal and began typing. I filled out the affidavit meticulously. I was not writing an angry letter. I was constructing an airtight legal snare. Under the section asking for the identity of the suspect, I calmly typed out my mother Brenda's full legal name, her primary residential address, and her phone number. I detailed the fraudulently acquired $65,000 joint loan, citing the specific timestamps and the IP address that traced directly back to her living room router. Then I moved on to the second incident report. This one was entirely dedicated to Brandon. I documented his exact location at the luxury resort in Maui. I typed out a transcript of his recorded FaceTime confession, where he admitted to using my platinum credit card without my explicit consent. By crossing state lines to commit financial fraud and utilizing communication networks to do it, my brother had successfully elevated a petty family dispute into federal wire fraud. Once the FTC affidavit was officially generated, the system provided me with a verified federal identity theft case number. But I was not finished. I immediately opened a new tab and accessed the Chicago Police Department online reporting system. I filed a formal criminal complaint for identity theft and credit card fraud. I attached the IP logs from the bank, the electronic signature routing data, and the details of the stolen credit card currently being drained in Hawaii. I hit submit and watched the loading circle spin. A few moments later, the system returned an official police report number. My mother and brother were now documented suspects in an active law enforcement database. Armed with those two vital pieces of documentation, I moved to the next critical phase of the lockdown protocol. I opened the administrative portals for all three major credit bureaus: Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. With a few swift calculated keystrokes, I initiated a total security freeze on my Social Security number. A credit freeze is the nuclear option of personal finance. It meant that absolutely nobody, not even me, could open a new line of credit, lease a vehicle, rent an apartment, or take out a loan without a rigorous multi-step federal identity verification process. My pristine credit profile, the very asset my family had decided to mine for their own selfish gain, was now locked inside an impenetrable digital vault. The final step of my plan was easily the most satisfying. I logged back into my primary banking portal. I did not bother calling customer service to argue with another apathetic representative like Greg. I knew the internal systems better than they did. I went straight to the automated fraud lockdown dashboard, a secure portal specifically reserved for verified victims of identity theft. I entered my police report number and my FTC affidavit number into the required verification fields. The banking algorithm recognized the federal identification codes instantly. The bureaucratic red tape dissolved completely. A severe warning prompt appeared in the center of my screen. It asked if I wanted to initiate a total account lockdown, which would instantly revoke all secondary access, cancel all physical cards, and freeze all compromised lines of credit. I hovered my mouse over the bright red confirm button. I thought about Jasmine flaunting her diamond ring. I thought about Brandon leaning back in his beachfront cabana, arrogantly telling me to just pay the bill. And I thought about my mother standing in the doorway of a $65,000 party, telling me I was not family. I clicked the confirm button. The banking system did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. A bright green checkmark flashed across the screen, signaling absolute success. The protocols executed my command with ruthless efficiency. The digital tether connecting my wealth to their fantasy lifestyle was permanently severed. The system instantly revoked all authorized user privileges linked to my name. My compromised platinum credit card was canceled and flagged as stolen. The fraudulent $65,000 joint loan account was frozen and locked down pending federal review. The money tap was officially shut off for good. Thousands of miles away from the cold reality of my Chicago apartment, the warm tropical breeze of Maui flowed through the open doors of an exclusive designer boutique. Brandon and Jasmine were strolling through the high-end shopping district connected to their luxury resort. Jasmine was still riding the high of her perfectly curated social media honeymoon. She stopped in front of a gleaming glass display case, her eyes locking onto a $5,000 diamond-encrusted watch. She tapped the glass, looking up at Brandon with a practiced pout. Brandon, eager to maintain his facade as a wealthy heir, confidently signaled the sales clerk. He pulled my platinum credit card from his designer wallet and dropped it onto the glass counter with an arrogant flick of his wrist. The smartly dressed clerk picked up the card, typed the $5,000 amount into the terminal, and inserted the chip. The machine processed for a brief second before emitting a sharp, angry beep. The screen flashed a bright red error message, declined. The clerk offered a polite, practiced smile, handing the card back to Brandon. "I am sorry, sir, but the transaction was not approved," the clerk said smoothly. "Could you perhaps provide an alternate method of payment?" Brandon let out an annoyed sigh, shaking his head as if the bank had made a foolish mistake. "Just run it again," he ordered, his tone dripping with condescension. "The fraud protection software probably just flagged it because we are traveling out of state. It happens all the time when you have a high limit. Just push it through." The clerk patiently inserted the card a second time. This time the machine beeped twice. The screen displayed a new, far more severe message. "Card canceled, retain card." The clerk frowned, slipping the platinum card behind the counter. "Sir, the issuing bank has permanently canceled this account and instructed me to retain the physical card due to reported fraud," the clerk announced, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet, echoing boutique. Several other wealthy shoppers turned their heads to look. Jasmine felt her face flush with intense embarrassment. She grabbed Brandon by the arm, hissing at him to fix the situation immediately. Brandon, suddenly sweating under his expensive linen shirt, patted his pockets, realizing he had absolutely no other way to pay. He grabbed Jasmine by the hand and hurried out of the boutique, muttering curses under his breath about banking errors. They practically sprinted back to the grand lobby of their luxury resort, hoping to retreat to their $2,000 a night oceanfront suite. But their humiliation was only just beginning. As they crossed the imported marble floors of the lobby, the resort general manager stepped directly into their path. He was flanked by two burly hotel security guards. "Excuse me, sir," the manager said, his voice completely devoid of the deferential warmth he had shown them at check-in. "We need to address the billing status of your suite immediately." Brandon puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his arrogant posture. "Not right now," he snapped. "My bank is having a system glitch. I will sort it out later. I need to get to my room." "You do not have access to your room," the manager replied loudly. His voice echoed through the bustling lobby, drawing the attention of dozens of wealthy guests relaxing on the plush sofas. "The credit card you placed on file for this reservation has been globally frozen and flagged for federal fraud. Your current outstanding balance for the room, the cabana rentals, and your room service charges is currently sitting at over $9,000. All electronic keycards to your penthouse suite have been deactivated. Unless you can provide a valid, authorized form of payment for the entire balance, right this very second, we will be forced to pack your belongings and physically escort you off the resort property." Jasmine let out a horrified gasp. The illusion of her flawless, wealthy lifestyle shattered instantly in front of a lobby full of staring strangers. She looked at Brandon, her eyes wide with panic and fury. Brandon stood there frozen, his jaw hanging open, the reality of the situation finally crashing down on him. He had no money, he had no backup cards, he had absolutely nothing. Panicking, Brandon pulled out his cell phone and frantically dialed the only person who had always bailed him out of his own messes. He called our mother. He stood in the corner of the lobby, desperately explaining the nightmare unfolding around him as security watched him closely. Back in Chicago, I was calmly reviewing a client file when my phone violently vibrated across my desk. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I took a slow sip of my coffee, let the phone ring twice to savor the moment, and calmly answered. Megan. My mother screamed at the absolute top of her lungs, her voice completely unhinged. What did you just do? You are ruining your brother's honeymoon. I simply pressed the red button, ending the call mid-sentence, and tossed the phone onto my glass desk. Almost immediately, the device began to buzz again. I let it ring. Then it rang again, and again. By the time I finished reviewing my client file and closed my laptop, my mother had left 3 separate voicemails. I pressed play on the first one, my expression completely flat. Megan, unlock that card right this second, my mother demanded, her voice shaking with blinding rage. Brandon is standing in the lobby of a high-end hotel with security guards treating him like a common thief. You call your bank right now and authorize whatever charges he needs. You are acting like a spoiled, jealous child, and I will not stand for it. The second voicemail arrived 3 minutes later, and her tone had shifted from demanding to downright threatening. Listen to me very carefully, she hissed. If you do not fix this by the end of the hour, I am calling Aunt Diane, Uncle Robert, and the rest of the extended family. I am going to tell them that you are financially abusing your own parents. I will tell them you are trying to extort us and that you abandoned your brother in Hawaii out of pure spite. You will be dead to this family, Megan. Do you hear me? Dead to us. The third voicemail was just a crescendo of unhinged screaming. You arrogant little brat. You think because you have a fancy degree in a penthouse you can treat us like garbage. Fix the card, Megan. Fix it now, or I swear I will make you regret the day you were born. I will ruin your reputation. I will call your boss. I will do whatever it takes. I backed up the voicemails to my secure cloud storage first. Those recordings were excellent supplementary evidence. But to completely cement the federal fraud case, I needed something more concrete. I needed my mother to admit clearly and in her own words that she forged my signature on that $65,000 loan. She was too arrogant to put it in writing, which meant I needed to capture it in person. I grabbed my car keys, slipped into my tailored blazer, and headed down to the parking garage. The drive to the Chicago suburbs took just over 40 minutes. The transition from the gleaming steel of the city to the quiet, manicured lawns of my childhood neighborhood felt like stepping back in time. The large brick houses with their perfect landscaping hid decades of toxic secrets. For years, I had allowed these people to drain my energy and my finances, believing that setting myself on fire to keep them warm was simply the cost of having a family. Not anymore. The financial abuse ended today. I pulled my car into the wide driveway of their 2-story colonial house. My mother's luxury SUV was parked haphazardly near the garage, a clear sign of her frantic state of mind. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet cabin of my car for a moment, centering myself. I pulled out my phone, opened a high-definition voice recording application, and hit the red record button. The timer started ticking. I locked the screen and slipped the device deep into the inside pocket of my blazer, ensuring the microphone was completely unobstructed. I walked up the concrete path, bypassed the doorbell, and used the spare key I still kept on my keyring. The heavy front door clicked open. The house was eerily silent. I expected to be immediately ambushed by my mother throwing a screaming tantrum in the foyer, but the hallway was completely empty. The air felt heavy, thick with the kind of tension that precedes a massive storm. I closed the door quietly behind me and walked toward the formal living room. As I turned the corner into the adjoining dining room, I finally saw movement. But it was not my mother. My father, Thomas, was sitting perfectly upright at the head of the long mahogany dining table. He was dressed in a crisp button-down shirt, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He looked entirely too calm for a man whose son was currently being detained by resort security thousands of miles away. As I stepped into the room, he looked up, offering me a small, almost pitying smile. "Have a seat, Megan," my father said softly, gesturing to the chair opposite him. I remained standing, my eyes locking onto the object resting on the polished wood surface between us. It was a freshly printed multi-page document neatly stapled at the corner. "What is this?" I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. My father slowly slid the document across the table toward me. "It is a payment plan," he stated simply. "We have crunched the numbers. We know you are upset about the venue bill, so your mother and I are willing to compromise. If you sign this agreement, taking full responsibility for the $65,000 loan, we will agree to pay you back $200 a month. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line, and we can put this ugly little family dispute behind us." I looked down at the typed document, my eyes scanning the absurd terms my father had drafted. $200 a month. At that repayment rate, assuming zero interest, it would take them over 27 years to pay me back for a wedding I was explicitly banned from attending. I did not laugh. I did not shout. I simply pushed the piece of paper back across the polished mahogany table. "I am not signing that," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "And I am not paying a single cent toward that fraudulent loan." My father let out a long, disappointed sigh, the kind of heavy exhale he always used to make me feel like a difficult child. "Come on, Megan. Do not be so stubborn," he said, leaning forward. "We are family. And family requires compromise. You have always been the smart one, the successful one. You make incredible money living in the city. Brandon has always struggled to find his footing, you know that." He paused, attempting to look at me with warm, fatherly affection. "You paid off his $50,000 college debt 5 years ago without batting an eye. What is another $65,000 now? It is just money, Megan. You can easily absorb this cost, but this situation will completely ruin your brother. He needs this wedding to keep Jasmine happy. Just look at the bigger picture and show some family loyalty." Family loyalty. I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. Family loyalty is exactly why I paid his college tuition. And what did I get in return? A brother who maxes out my stolen credit cards on his honeymoon, and a mother who treats me like a walking ATM. I am done being his financial safety net. The answer is absolutely no. Before my father could formulate another manipulative response, the heavy wooden doors of the dining room burst open. My mother stormed into the room, her face flushed a deep, angry shade of red. She was practically foaming at the mouth, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. She had clearly been listening from the hallway. "You ungrateful, spiteful little brat!" my mother screamed, her voice vibrating off the crystal chandelier above us. I just got off the phone with Brandon again. The hotel security locked them out of their suite. They are sitting in the lobby, surrounded by their luggage. Jasmine is crying hysterically in front of everyone. "You ruined their honeymoon. You ruined everything." "I ruined absolutely nothing," I replied calmly, never breaking my intense eye contact with her. "You ruined his honeymoon the second you committed federal identity theft to fund it." My mother slammed both of her hands down on the dining table, leaning in so close I could smell the sharp mint of her chewing gum. "Identity theft," she mocked, her voice dripping with pure venom. "Stop throwing around legal buzzwords like you are some kind of hotshot lawyer. You are my daughter. I gave birth to you. I raised you. I have every right to use your information when this family needs it. So you admit it?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly conversational to ensure the hidden microphone inside my blazer captured every single syllable. "You admit that you took my social security number, logged into my old email account, and digitally forged my signature on that $65,000 joint loan contract." "Yes, I signed your name," my mother shrieked, completely abandoning any sense of self-preservation. "Yes, I used your old email. I did whatever I had to do because you are too incredibly selfish to help your own flesh and blood. I signed the contract, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. You owe us this money. You owe Brandon this wedding. Now pick up that pen and sign the payment plan before I make sure nobody ever speaks to you again." She stood there, chest heaving, looking incredibly proud of herself. She honestly believed her loud voice and aggressive posturing would force me into submission, just like it always had when I was a teenager. My father sat quietly, offering no pushback to her deranged confessions, silently endorsing her criminal behavior. I slowly stood up from my chair, buttoning the center button of my tailored blazer. I reached into my inside pocket, but I did not pull out a pen to sign their ridiculous document. I simply rested my hand against the fabric right over the hidden recording device. "I do not think you fully understand who you are screaming at, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a low, authoritative register. "I am not just your obedient daughter anymore. I am a certified fraud examiner. I specialize in tracking stolen money across international borders and building airtight cases against corporate embezzlers." I continued, taking a slow step toward her. "I spend my weekdays sitting in conference rooms with federal prosecutors, financial investigators, and IRS agents. My entire career is built on finding the paper trail that arrogant people think they successfully hid. Did you genuinely believe you could commit blatant financial crimes against me, leaving a digital footprint a mile wide, and I would just quietly accept a pathetic $200 a month payment plan to make it go away?" My mother blinked, her expression faltering for just a fraction of a second. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, but her jaw remained stubbornly set. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between us. The polished mahogany table suddenly looked a lot less like a negotiation space and more like an interrogation room. "Let me break down exactly what happened here, so there is absolutely zero confusion moving forward," I said, maintaining a steady, unrelenting gaze. "When you used my social security number, bypassed the bank security protocols, and intercepted the two-factor authentication to secure that $65,000 loan, you committed identity theft. Because that loan was processed through a federally insured banking institution, it instantly became a federal offense. It was not a mother borrowing from her daughter, it was a calculated theft. And then there is your precious Brandon. By taking my physical credit card across state lines to the state of Hawaii and attempting to make unauthorized luxury purchases over a telecommunications network, he committed wire fraud." "Megan, please lower your voice." Thomas interrupted, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. "There is absolutely no need to use words like fraud or offense in this house. We are just talking about a family misunderstanding. Nobody is going to prison over a wedding bill. You are letting your anger cloud your judgment. Let us just take a deep breath, sit down, and be reasonable about this." "There is no misunderstanding, Thomas," I snapped, refusing to let him minimize the severity of the situation. "In the state of Illinois, aggravated identity theft is a Class 3 felony. It carries a mandatory sentence of 2 to 5 years in state prison. Wire fraud carries even steeper federal penalties. We are talking about massive financial fines, forced restitution, and actual time behind bars. And since you are sitting there holding a printed contract, actively trying to extort me into paying for the crime you helped conceal, you are legally considered an accessory after the fact. You are entirely complicit." The silence in the dining room was completely deafening. The slow, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway sounded exactly like a judge banging a gavel. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely in control of the dynamic in this house. The childhood fear of their disapproval, the desperate lingering need for their validation, it was all entirely gone. It had been cleanly burned away, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of the law. "I am not here to negotiate a payment plan," I stated clearly, letting every single word hang heavily in the air. "I did not drive all the way out to the suburbs to ask for a maternal apology. I came here to look you in the eye and tell you that the legal process has already begun. I have already filed a formal sworn affidavit with the Federal Trade Commission. I have already filed a criminal complaint with the Chicago Police Department. And I have placed a total security freeze on my entire credit profile, which is exactly why your golden boy is currently stranded in a hotel lobby thousands of miles away with no way to pay his massive bill." I watched my father's face drain of all color. He looked like a man who had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. He finally understood that the heavy shield of family loyalty he had hidden behind for decades was completely shattered. The law did not care that he was my father. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg or plead for mercy, but no sound came out. I turned my attention back to my mother. I waited for the reality of her impending arrest to finally break through her thick skull. I expected the classic narcissistic collapse. I expected the fake tears, the frantic gaslighting, the desperate attempts to play the ultimate victim. I expected her to drop to her knees and beg me to call the police and withdraw the reports immediately. But Brenda did not cry. She did not beg. She did not even look remotely afraid. Instead, the corners of her mouth twitched upward. Her eyes narrowed into cold, calculating slits. And then, right in the middle of her pristine, perfectly decorated dining room, my mother threw her head back and laughed right in my face. Her laughter echoed off the crystal chandelier, a harsh, grating sound that completely shattered the tense silence of the dining room. I watched her, my expression unwavering as she wiped a fake tear of mirth from the corner of her eye. She did not look like a woman facing federal prison. She looked exactly like a chess player who had just announced checkmate. "You really think you are the smartest person in the room?" Brenda chuckled, shaking her head as she walked over to the antique mahogany credenza nestled against the far wall. "You come into my house, throwing around your little Federal Trade Commission acronyms and your police report numbers, thinking you have me backed into a corner. You honestly think I would put my financial future in your hands without an insurance policy?" She opened the top drawer of the credenza and pulled out a thick manila folder. She walked back to the dining table and slapped the folder down right next to the ridiculous payment plan my father had drafted. She tapped her manicured index finger against the heavy paper stock, the sound sharp and demanding. "Open it." My mother challenged, her eyes gleaming with absolute malice. I did not touch the folder. I knew better than to handle documents a suspect wanted me to handle, but I leaned forward just enough to read the bold print on the top page. It was a property deed. 3 years ago, Brenda began, her voice dripping with absolute triumph. "You signed a general power of attorney document. Do you remember that, Megan? You were traveling out of the country for one of your little corporate audits, and we had that minor property tax dispute with the city. You signed the paperwork so your father and I could handle the legal proceedings on your behalf while you were in Europe." I remembered perfectly. It was supposed to be a limited power of attorney strictly for handling a municipal tax assessment on a family trust account. It was a massive oversight on my part, a momentary lapse in my professional paranoia, because I had foolishly trusted my own parents to handle a simple administrative task. "Well," Brenda smirked, leaning heavily across the table, "I took that power of attorney to a very friendly notary, and I used it to legally transfer the deed of this entire property, this house, the land, everything completely into your name. You are the sole legal owner of this beautiful colonial estate, Megan. Congratulations on your new home." I stared at her, my analytical mind rapidly processing the legal implications of her confession. My father refused to meet my gaze, staring intently at his hands folded on the table. "So go ahead," my mother taunted, crossing her arms over her chest. "Call the police. Tell the bank to freeze the accounts. Refuse to pay the $65,000 wedding bill. But let me tell you exactly what will happen if you do. If you do not pay that loan, the bank will come looking for assets. And since this house is legally your asset, and it was used as collateral for the extended credit lines we drew against it, the bank will initiate a massive foreclosure. They will seize your property, Megan. A public foreclosure will absolutely destroy your pristine credit score. You will lose your high-level security clearances for your fancy fraud examiner job. You will lose your career." She let out another self-satisfied laugh, completely drunk on her own perceived power. "You thought you had me trapped today. I had you trapped 3 years ago. You are going to pay for Brandon's wedding, and you are going to drop those federal police reports today, or I will happily let the bank take your house and ruin your perfect life." She thought she had delivered the ultimate death blow. She thought my career and my credit score were the only things I cared about, and she was weaponizing them against me. But she made one fatal miscalculation in her grand master plan. She assumed I would panic and blindly accept her version of the truth. I am a professional auditor. I never trust documents a fraudster hands me. I did not say a single word. I simply turned around, walked out of the dining room, and headed straight for the front door. I heard her shouting after me, demanding that I agree to her terms, but I completely ignored her. I walked out into the cool afternoon air, got into my car, and started the engine. I did not drive back to the city. I pulled out of the driveway and headed straight to the county clerk office. If she was playing games with property deeds, I needed to verify public records. The drive to the county clerk office took less than 20 minutes, but in the silence of my car, it felt like an eternity. My mind was racing, actively processing the sheer audacity of my mother's arrogant confession. If she had actually transferred the deed of the property into my name without my knowledge, she had officially crossed a line from simple identity theft into complex real estate fraud. I parked my car in the sprawling gray concrete lot of the municipal building and walked briskly inside. The sterile, fluorescent-lit environment of the government office was a stark contrast to the dramatic, tense atmosphere of my parents' formal dining room. This was my element. Public records, legal filings, and digital paper trails were the exact tools I used to dismantle white-collar criminals every single day of my life. I approached the records department counter and requested the complete property history for the suburban residential address. The clerk, an older woman with thick glasses, typed the information into her terminal and printed out a heavy stack of documents. I thanked her, took the papers to a quiet wooden table in the corner of the room, and began to review them line by line. My mother had not been bluffing about the primary document. There it was, officially stamped and filed exactly 3 years ago. A warranty deed transferring sole ownership of the large colonial house from my parents directly to me, authorized by the limited power of attorney I had foolishly signed for that minor tax dispute before leaving for Europe. But as a certified fraud examiner, I knew that transferring a deed was never the end of the story. Fraudsters do not simply give away valuable real estate assets for free. They do it to distance themselves from legal liability or to leverage the new owner's pristine credit profile for massive cash withdrawals. I flipped past the original deed and started digging deeply into the encumbrances and liens attached to the property. That is exactly when the true horrifying scale of my mother's deception began to reveal itself in black and white. 6 months after the deed was fraudulently transferred into my name, a massive secondary mortgage was taken out against the property. The application listed me as the primary and sole borrower, utilizing my Social Security number and my flawless credit score to secure an incredibly low interest rate. The signature on the document was a perfect digital forgery, completely identical to the one used for the recent wedding bill. But the nightmare did not stop there. I kept flipping pages, my stomach twisting into tighter knots with every single new financial document I uncovered. 2 years ago, a massive home equity line of credit was successfully opened again entirely in my name. The banking records showed a consistent pattern of maximum cash withdrawals executed over the past 24 consecutive months. My analytical mind instantly began connecting the disparate data points. I thought about Brandon suddenly upgrading his entire lifestyle. The brand new luxury SUV he drove to family events. The expensive designer watches he flaunted online. The lavish trips he frequently took to Miami and Las Vegas. He had been actively playing the role of a wealthy, successful entrepreneur, and Jasmine had fallen right into the trap, fully believing she was marrying into a high society family with unlimited resources. But there was absolutely no family wealth. My parents were not wealthy in the slightest. They had secretly turned their house into a massive personal ATM, and I was the one legally responsible for keeping it stocked with cash. They had drained every single ounce of equity out of the property to fund my brother's pathetic illusion of success. My mother had not just forged my signature for a quick wedding venue deposit. She and my father had spent the last 5 years systematically destroying my financial identity entirely behind my back, smiling in my face the entire time. I pulled a sharp black pen from my purse and started writing the outstanding financial balances on the back of the manila envelope the clerk had given me. I carefully wrote down the principal balance of the secondary mortgage. I added the entirely maxed-out home equity line of credit. I factored in the multiple high-limit credit cards they had secretly opened using my Social Security number, the very cards Brandon had just attempted to use in Hawaii. And finally, I added the initial $65,000 joint loan for the luxury Aspen wedding. I drew a thick line underneath the long column of numbers and calculated the final sum. I stared at the total, the ink dark and heavy against the brown paper. The $65,000 wedding bill that had started this entire confrontation was nothing but a drop in the bucket. It was just the very tip of a massive rotting iceberg. The total amount of fraudulent debt my family had secretly racked up in my name was a staggering $300,000 exactly. I sat in the quiet corner of the county clerk office, the heavy reality of the $300,000 debt settling over me like a suffocating blanket. My parents had stolen my future to fund a fantasy. I folded the documents, slid them into the manila envelope, and walked back out to my car. I needed to return to my apartment and immediately forward these public records to the federal investigators. The civil dispute my bank had tried to claim was now undeniably a massive multi-layered criminal conspiracy. As I merged onto the highway heading back toward downtown Chicago, my phone resting in the cup holder vibrated. Then it vibrated again. Within 30 seconds, the device was emitting a continuous angry hum. I assumed it was my mother realizing her blackmail attempt had failed, calling to hurl more abuse. But when I parked in my building garage and picked up the phone, the screen was completely flooded with notifications from social media platforms I rarely even checked. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok alerts were cascading down my screen in a chaotic blur. I had hundreds of new follower requests, direct messages, and angry tags. My stomach tightened. I tapped on the most recent notification, which was a direct link to a TikTok video. The video loaded instantly. There was Jasmine sitting on what looked like the edge of a cheap generic airport hotel bed, a stark contrast to the luxurious Maui cabana from just a few hours prior. She was not wearing her designer swimsuit. She was dressed in an oversized gray hoodie, her makeup intentionally smudged to make it look like she had been crying for hours. A perfectly positioned ring light illuminated her tear-streaked face. "Hey, guys!" Jasmine sniffled into the camera, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this. But my honeymoon has officially been destroyed, and I need to speak my truth before her family tries to silence me." She paused, wiping away a non-existent tear, playing the role of the devastated bride flawlessly. She launched into a highly edited, completely fabricated story. She told her massive audience that her husband's wealthy, jealous older sister had thrown a massive fit about not being the center of attention at their wedding. She claimed that I had maliciously waited until they were thousands of miles away in Hawaii to cut off the credit cards I had explicitly promised them as a wedding gift, intentionally leaving them stranded, humiliated, and locked out of their hotel room with no food or money. But Jasmine did not stop at calling me jealous. She knew exactly how to weaponize the internet. She looked directly into the camera, her expression shifting from sorrow to righteous indignation. "It is no secret that I am the only Black woman in this family," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a serious, dramatic whisper. "From day one, this sister-in-law has looked down on me. She hated that her brother chose an African-American woman. She could not stand seeing a Black creator thriving and marrying into her pristine, privileged world. So she used her corporate wealth to put me in my place. She financially abused us to show me that I will never truly belong. She weaponized her money to humiliate a woman of color on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life." I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. It was a masterclass in digital manipulation. She had taken her own complicity in federal wire fraud and spun it into a viral narrative of racial discrimination and victimhood. She deliberately omitted the fact that the money was stolen. She omitted the forged signature. She painted me as a racist, wealthy tyrant who crushed her dreams out of pure bigotry. I checked the metrics at the bottom of the screen. The video had only been live for 3 hours, but it already had over 2 million views. The engagement was skyrocketing. Influencers with millions of their own followers were duetting the video, expressing their outrage and demanding justice for Jasmine. The internet loves a clear villain, and Jasmine had just served my head on a silver platter. I tapped the comments section. It was a toxic wasteland of pure hatred directed entirely at me. People were demanding to know my name and where I worked, but the real nightmare was waiting in my direct messages. My phone vibrated violently in my hand again. I opened my inbox. Dozens of messages from complete strangers were pouring in every single second. The internet mob had already found my full name, my city, and my corporate title. The messages were not just angry. They were violent. "Watch your back, you racist piece of trash," one message read. "We know you live in Chicago and we are coming for you," read another. My phone was exploding with graphic, horrifying death threats from Jasmine's rabid followers, all ready to destroy my life for a crime I did not commit. It was impossible to sleep that night. By Monday morning, the digital wildfire had spread from TikTok directly to my professional life. Jasmine's followers had successfully located my LinkedIn profile. They were no longer just sending me angry direct messages. They were actively tagging my employer, a highly respected financial forensics firm in downtown Chicago. They left hundreds of furious comments on the company's official corporate page, demanding that I be terminated immediately for my supposed racist and abusive behavior. I walked into the glass lobby of my office building at exactly 8 in the morning, ignoring the heavy knot of anxiety twisting in my gut. I knew it was only a matter of time before the executive suite caught wind of the situation. I barely had time to set my briefcase down on my desk before my desk phone rang. It was the executive assistant for Mitchell, the senior partner and director of our forensics division. "Mitchell needs to see you in his office immediately," she said, her voice unusually tight and professional. I took a deep, steadying breath. I grabbed the thick manila envelope containing my public records, the bank logs and the federal affidavits, and walked down the long corridor to the corner office. When I stepped inside, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. Mitchell was sitting behind his massive oak desk, staring intently at a tablet screen that was currently displaying Jasmine's viral, tear-filled video. The company's head of public relations was pacing nervously by the floor-to-ceiling window. "Megan, please sit down," Mitchell said, his tone serious and entirely unreadable. He turned the tablet around so I could see the paused video. "Are you aware of the massive social media campaign currently targeting you, and by extension, this entire firm? Our corporate pages are being absolutely flooded with demands for your immediate termination. This young woman is claiming you financially abused her and her husband, and she is strategically framing it as a racially motivated attack. This is a massive public relations nightmare." The public relations director stopped pacing and crossed her arms tightly. "We might need to place you on temporary administrative leave pending a full internal investigation," she suggested, anxiously looking between me and Mitchell. "We simply cannot afford to have our brand associated with these kinds of severe allegations. The internet mob is incredibly volatile." I did not flinch. I did not offer a frantic emotional defense or burst into tears. I simply opened the heavy manila envelope and pulled out the thick stack of documents I had organized over the weekend. I placed them neatly on Mitchell's polished desk, right next to the tablet playing Jasmine's fabricated lies. "I am not a racist, and I am certainly not an abuser," I stated with absolute icy calm. "I am the victim of a $300,000 financial conspiracy executed by my own parents and my brother. The woman crying in that video is currently complicit in federal wire fraud." I then systematically walked them through the entire nightmare. I showed them the fraudulent $65,000 loan agreement and the digital signature verification. I pointed to the IP address logs pointing directly to my mother's residential router. I revealed the public records proving the fraudulent deed transfer of the suburban house, the secretly maxed-out secondary mortgages, and the stolen credit cards actively being used in Hawaii. I presented the official police report from the Chicago Police Department and the sworn affidavit from the Federal Trade Commission. The public relations director stepped forward, her eyes scanning the official government seals and the undeniable digital trails. She stared at the documents in absolute stunned silence, the color draining from her face as she realized the true severity of the crime. She looked at the tablet, then back at the paperwork, completely speechless. Mitchell leaned forward, picking up the federal police report and the IP tracking logs. He read over the detailed financial breakdown with the focused intensity of a man completely in his element. A long, heavy silence filled the corner office, broken only by the faint hum of the city traffic far below. Then the serious corporate mask Mitchell had been wearing completely melted away. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, and a slow, undeniably predatory smile spread across his face. Before Mitchell founded this forensics firm, he spent 15 years as a highly decorated elite investigator for the FBI White-Collar Crime Division. He despised fraudsters more than anything in the world. "You handled the preliminary documentation flawlessly," Megan Mitchell finally said, his eyes gleaming with dangerous anticipation. "But you should not fight a multi-state federal fraud case on your own. How would you feel about letting our corporate legal department absolutely crush your family?" I looked across the polished oak desk at Mitchell, absorbing the sheer weight of his offer. The public relations director was still visibly panicked about the viral social media backlash, but Mitchell and I understood something fundamental about corporate survival. You do not fight a digital mob with defensive press releases or emotional public apologies. You fight them with undeniable legal destruction. I accepted his offer without a single second thought. For the next 7 days, I completely ignored the internet. I deleted the social media applications from my cell phone, muted the notifications, and refused to read another death threat. Let Jasmine and her rabid followers scream into the digital void. Let them build their public narrative on a fragile foundation of lies. I was busy building a trap, and I was using the full terrifying power of a multi-million-dollar forensics firm to do it. With the elite corporate legal team backing me, the bureaucratic walls that usually slow down fraud investigations completely vanished. We secured emergency subpoenas and easily bypassed the standard financial waiting periods. My days and nights blurred together as I sat in the secure conference room, methodically tracing every single cent of the stolen $300,000. I followed the complex digital breadcrumbs from the fraudulent home equity line of credit directly into a series of shell checking accounts my mother had secretly established. The sheer arrogance of their daily spending habits was staggering. I tracked tens of thousands of dollars funneled directly into Brandon's lavish lifestyle. He was draining my stolen equity to buy expensive dinners, custom-tailored suits, and VIP table service at exclusive downtown clubs. He was meticulously funding an absolute illusion, desperate to convince his demanding new bride that he was a wealthy heir with unlimited resources. But expensive dinners and designer clothes were simply not enough to secure a woman like Jasmine. She was an influencer whose entire personal brand relied heavily on projecting high society luxury to her followers. She expected a physical domain that perfectly matched the incredibly wealthy aesthetic Brandon had promised her. As I dug deeper into the bank statements, parsing through hundreds of individual corporate transactions, I noticed a massive financial anomaly. A lump sum wire transfer of exactly $40,000 had been executed just 3 months prior. The money had bypassed the usual retail spending patterns and was routed directly to a highly prestigious property management group located right here in Chicago. My pulse quickened as I ran the routing numbers through our database. The property management firm exclusively handled ultra-luxury real estate properties in the Gold Coast neighborhood, one of the most expensive and exclusive residential districts in the entire city. Brandon had used $40,000 of my stolen money to pay a massive security deposit and 6 months of upfront rent on a sprawling high-floor luxury apartment. He desperately needed a breathtaking backdrop for Jasmine's daily social media videos, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble countertops, and secure private elevator access. He had completely fabricated a life of extreme luxury just a few miles away from my own downtown office, using my pristine credit profile as his personal bank vault. I pulled the specific building address and the exact unit number directly from the wire transfer memo line. The dossier included interior photographs. It was a massive penthouse featuring sweeping views of Lake Michigan. The monthly rent was an astronomical $7,000, a sum Brandon could never afford. He lived like a king on my stolen credit. I immediately requested the full rental dossier from the property management group. Thanks to the federal police report and the aggressive legal posturing of Mitchell's corporate team, the management company complied within the hour, absolutely terrified of being implicated in a federal wire fraud conspiracy. They rapidly emailed over the complete lease agreement in a secure digital file. I opened the document on the large conference room monitor, my eyes quickly scanning the initial cover page. I slowly scrolled down to the primary tenant information section, fully expecting to see Brandon's name listed alongside a fake guarantor signature from my mother. I expected to find that they had simply used my stolen credit cards to financially back his personal lease while he remained the sole legal resident. But as I finally reached the final signature page at the bottom of the document, a cold, incredibly sharp realization hit me. Brandon had not just used my money to pay his expensive rent. He had used my stolen identity to physically secure the property. They're printed in bold black ink as the sole primary tenant of the sprawling Gold Coast luxury apartment was my exact name. The lease was legally mine, and the trap was perfectly set. I stared at the digital signature on the lease agreement, the bold black ink spelling out my own name. It was the ultimate mistake on their part. By fraudulently leasing the property under my identity, Brandon had not secured a permanent home for himself and his new bride. He had legally made me the master tenant of the penthouse. I possessed the absolute authority to terminate the lease request, an immediate change of locks, and order a swift eviction without going through a lengthy judicial tenant dispute. I smiled a genuine cold smile and forwarded the document directly to Mitchell and his corporate legal team. The trap was no longer just set. The steel jaws were wide open, completely hidden, waiting for them to step inside. While I was quietly finalizing my federal case behind the glass walls of my corporate forensics firm, Brandon and Jasmine were experiencing a very different reality. Their luxurious Maui honeymoon had ended in a spectacular disaster. With all my credit lines permanently frozen, they had absolutely no way to pay their mounting resort bill. In a desperate panic, my mother had been forced to liquidate a massive portion of her own retirement savings. She paid exorbitant early withdrawal penalties just to cover their $9,000 hotel debt and avoid immediate police involvement in Hawaii. She then scraped together whatever funds she had left to purchase 2 last-minute economy-class tickets to fly the newlyweds back to Chicago. For Jasmine, who had spent the week boasting to her thousands of followers about flying first class, the flight back was a nightmare. She was forced to sit in a cramped middle seat right next to the lavatory for 9 agonizing hours. But the moment their plane finally touched down at O'Hare International Airport, their shared delusion immediately reasserted itself. My complete radio silence over the past 7 days had deeply emboldened them. I had not responded to my mother's unhinged voicemails. I had not publicly defended myself against Jasmine's highly manipulated viral TikTok video. I had not sent a single angry text message. Jasmine had even posted a smug follow-up video from the airport, claiming the internet had successfully taught me a lesson. To a family composed entirely of narcissists, silence does not mean strategy. Silence means absolute submission. They genuinely believed that the vicious cyber mob they unleashed had terrified me into total compliance. They thought I was cowering in my apartment, too paralyzed by fear and public shame to ever challenge them again. To celebrate their perceived victory and to vigorously reinforce their fraudulent image of extreme wealth to Jasmine's influencer friends, they decided to throw a massive housewarming party. They desperately needed to prove to the internet that they were completely unbothered, incredibly wealthy, and thriving in their new Gold Coast penthouse. Through the secondary shell accounts my mother still mistakenly thought were secure, they began bleeding the absolute last drops of my stolen equity. They ordered expensive catered food from a high-end private chef, purchased cases of premium imported champagne, and commissioned a custom floral installation for the penthouse entryway. They were spending thousands of dollars to put on a glamorous show for complete strangers, living inside an illusion that was rapidly approaching its expiration date. I knew all the intricate details about this lavish party because my mother simply could not resist the overwhelming urge to gloat. She was completely intoxicated by her own perceived power and her successful manipulation of the situation. She wanted to twist the knife one final time. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, as I was sitting in the boardroom reviewing the final draft of the eviction notices with Mitchell, an alert popped up on my phone. It was an email from Brenda. Attached to the message was a highly stylized, incredibly pretentious digital invitation to the Gold Coast housewarming event. The invitation outlined a strict formal dress code and included a direct link to their expensive home registry, practically demanding luxury gifts. But it was the personalized note my mother had manually typed at the very bottom of the email that truly showcased her sheer arrogance. She actually believed she was the one holding all the cards. I read the short sentence twice, shaking my head at the absolute absurdity of her delusion. "We are willing to let the unfortunate events of last week go," my mother had written. "Come to the apartment this Saturday evening, apologize to your brother and his wife in front of everyone for your selfish behavior, and we might find it in our hearts to forgive you." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, reading that final delusional sentence one more time. Apologize, and they might forgive me. The sheer magnitude of their entitlement was almost physically repulsive. I did not reply to the email. I did not send a fiery text message or demand an explanation. I simply took a screenshot of the digital invitation, attached it to my growing legal file, and forwarded it directly to Mitchell. This party was exactly the catalyst we needed to spring the trap. Early Friday morning, the secure conference room at my firm was transformed into a temporary command center. Mitchell sat at the head of the long glass table, looking entirely in his element. Seated across from me were two seasoned detectives from the Chicago Police Department Financial Crimes Unit, along with a sharply dressed special agent from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, heavy with the reality of what we were about to execute. I slid the thick manila folders containing all the gathered evidence across the table. The local detectives reviewed the local police reports, the forged lease agreement, and the timeline of the credit card theft. The IRS agent, a meticulous man who introduced himself as Agent Reynolds, examined the fraudulent secondary mortgages and the drained home equity line of credit. "This is a textbook case of multi-state wire fraud and aggravated identity theft," Agent Reynolds stated, adjusting his glasses as he looked over the bank logs. "By utilizing communication networks to secure the $65,000 loan crossing state lines with stolen credit cards to Hawaii and using those fraudulently obtained funds to lease property, your family has triggered a cascade of federal offenses. And because they failed to report the $300,000 in stolen equity as taxable income, they are now facing severe federal tax evasion charges. It is a massive, incredibly sloppy financial conspiracy." One of the local detectives, a tall man named Harris, nodded in agreement. "We took your preliminary filings to a federal judge late last night," Harris explained, pulling a stack of heavily stamped documents from his leather briefcase. "Given the overwhelming digital evidence, the IP logs, and the recorded audio confession you provided, the judge did not hesitate. We have fully authorized signed arrest warrants for both of your parents and your brother." My chest tightened for a fraction of a second, but it was not out of sorrow. It was the sharp, metallic feeling of pure justice finally snapping into place. They had spent my entire life making me feel small, demanding my compliance, and punishing my independence. Now they were about to face the absolute weight of the federal government. "We plan to execute the warrants tomorrow evening," Detective Harris continued, tapping the documents on the table. "We know they will all be gathered at the Gold Coast apartment for this housewarming event. It guarantees they will be in one location, preventing anyone from attempting to flee or destroy evidence." I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the glass table. "I have one specific request," I said, looking directly at Detective Harris. "I want to be the one to serve the eviction notice. I want to walk into that apartment first." The room went completely silent. Mitchell raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by my resolve. Detective Harris frowned slightly, exchanging a quick glance with his partner. "We usually do not allow civilians to breach a location during an active warrant execution," Harris cautioned. "It can create an unpredictable and volatile environment, especially with family involved." "I understand the protocol," I replied smoothly. "But you have read the lease agreement. Legally speaking, I am the sole primary tenant of that luxury apartment. It is my property. You need a master key or a forced entry to get past the lobby security and up to the penthouse." If I am with you, I can grant you immediate legal access to the premises as the lawful resident. I will hand them the eviction notice and expose the fraud to the room. The moment they react, you step in and execute the arrests." Agent Reynolds looked at Mitchell, then back at me. He gave a slow, approving nod. "It is unconventional, but she is legally correct," Reynolds noted. "Having the primary leaseholder grant us entry bypasses a massive amount of building security red tape." Harris sighed, rubbing the back of his neck before finally nodding his agreement. "Fine. We will do it your way, but you stay entirely behind us once the cuffs come out." The plan was officially set in stone. I spent the rest of Friday finalizing the paperwork, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over me. The anxiety that had plagued me for weeks was completely gone. Saturday evening arrived with a cold, biting wind sweeping off Lake Michigan. The Gold Coast neighborhood was glowing with the warm lights of expensive restaurants and exclusive high-rises. I pulled my car to the curb right in front of Brandon's towering luxury apartment building. The valet rushed forward to open my door. I stepped out onto the pristine pavement, smoothing down the front of my tailored black blazer. I was not alone. Flanking me on either side were Detective Harris and his partner, dressed in sharp, unassuming plain clothes, their federal badges completely hidden but ready to end the illusion once and for all. We walked directly through the heavy revolving glass doors of the grand lobby. The building concierge immediately stood right up behind his marble desk to intercept us. He politely asked for our names, his eyes scanning the plainclothes detectives with mild suspicion. I simply pulled my driver license from my purse and placed it on the desk. I told him I was Megan, the primary leaseholder, and I had lost my key fob. He typed my name into his computer system. I watched his posture relax instantly as the screen verified my identity. He handed me a master keycard, welcoming me home with a warm, professional smile. The detectives exchanged a brief, approving glance. My legal right to the property made this entire operation incredibly seamless. We stepped into the private, high-speed elevator, and I pressed the button for the top floor. The elevator car shot rapidly upward, my stomach dropping slightly, though not from the very high altitude. It was the adrenaline of knowing exactly what was waiting behind those heavy doors. When the large elevator doors slid open, the pulsing bass of loud, expensive club music instantly washed over us. The private vestibule leading to the apartment was adorned with massive, ridiculous floral arrangements that I knew were purchased with my drained home equity. I pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped inside my own apartment. The sheer scale of the gathering was absurd. At least 50 people were crammed into the massive, open-concept living room. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated with silver trays of champagne and expensive appetizers. The guests were a mix of Brandon's fake high society friends and Jasmine's network of fellow internet influencers. They were all dressed to the nines, completely oblivious to the fact that they were currently drinking stolen wine inside a crime scene. I stood quietly near the entryway for a moment, letting the detectives fan out slightly behind me, blending into the shadows of the foyer. My eyes swept carefully across the packed room, quickly locating the precise source of the absolute loudest noise. Jasmine was standing proudly near the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows, perfectly framed against the glittering nighttime skyline of downtown Chicago. She was wearing a stunning, shimmering cocktail dress and holding her smartphone mounted on an expensive stabilizing gimbal. She was currently broadcasting live video to her thousands of followers, completely in her element. I slowly walked across the imported hardwood floor, navigating through the crowd of chatting guests, listening closely to the absolute garbage spilling out of her mouth. She panned the camera around the luxurious room, making sure to capture the custom marble kitchen island and the expensive catered food. She was bragging about the sheer size of the penthouse, completely leaning into her fabricated persona. She told her eager audience that this very property was just the newest addition to her incredible husband's massive real estate portfolio. She giggled into the microphone, claiming Brandon had surprised her with the lease just to make her happy, spinning a pathetic fairy tale of unlimited personal wealth and privilege. She was so absorbed in her digital performance that she did not notice me approaching until I was less than 10 feet away. Jasmine casually turned the camera back toward herself to read the comments scrolling across the screen. As she adjusted her angle, her eyes darted over the top of the phone and locked directly onto me. Her fake radiant smile vanished instantly, the color completely drained from her perfectly contoured face. She lowered the expensive gimbal, slightly staring at me in absolute shock. But her panic quickly morphed into defensive rage. She remembered she had thousands of people watching her every move, and she desperately needed to maintain her narrative of the victimized bride. Jasmine pointed a manicured finger right at my chest and raised her voice so the entire room could hear her over the pulsing music. "What are you doing here?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You are not welcome in my home. Get out right now, you crazy jealous stalker." The music suddenly seemed less loud as dozens of guests turned their heads to watch the drama unfold. Conversations died instantly. Brandon, who had been talking to a group of men near the bar, dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor. He stared at me, paralyzed with fear. Jasmine kept the camera rolling, hoping to capture me retreating in shame to post online later. But I did not retreat. I took 3 deliberate steps forward, walking directly into the bright light of her ring flash. I stepped perfectly into the center frame of her live stream, holding up the thick, heavy legal binder containing the eviction notice and the federal fraud warrants. I did not break eye contact with Jasmine as I walked deliberately past her, heading straight for the massive custom marble kitchen island in the center of the room. The entire apartment was completely silent now, save for the low thrum of the club music that someone finally turned off. The tension in the air was incredibly thick. I reached the island and slammed the heavy legal binder down onto the polished marble surface. The loud, sharp crack echoed through the penthouse, making several guests physically jump. Jasmine scrambled to follow me, keeping the camera pointed directly at my face. "Are you crazy?" she hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward the dozens of influencers and socialites watching us. "Security is going to drag you out of here in handcuffs." I highly doubt that I replied, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. The security desk downstairs just verified my identity and handed me the master key. I opened the thick binder and pulled out the certified copy of the lease agreement, holding it up for everyone to see. "Welcome to my apartment," I announced, making sure I spoke loudly and clearly enough for her live stream microphone to pick up every single syllable. "Jasmine just told all of you that her wonderful husband added this gorgeous Gold Coast penthouse to his extensive real estate portfolio. That is a fascinating story. Unfortunately, it is a complete and total fabrication. My brother Brandon does not own a real estate portfolio. He does not have a high-paying corporate job. He has not held steady employment in 3 years. This apartment is legally leased entirely under my name, using my stolen social security number and my personal credit history." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back row whispered in absolute disbelief. Jasmine stared at the legal document in my hand, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked frantically over her shoulder at Brandon, but he was completely frozen, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. But the lies do not stop with this apartment. I continued, turning my attention directly to the glowing lens of Jasmine's smartphone. I wanted her thousands of followers to hear the absolute, unvarnished truth. The luxury SUV parked in the garage downstairs, the expensive catered food you are currently eating, even the $65,000 Aspen wedding you all watched online last month. Every single piece of this glamorous lifestyle was funded by a massive federal wire fraud conspiracy. I flipped to the next page, displaying the documented bank logs and the official Federal Trade Commission affidavits. Over the past 5 years, my parents and my brother secretly stole $300,000 of equity from my financial profile. They forged my signature on multiple bank loans and opened secret credit cards. When Brandon took his new bride on her lavish honeymoon, he used my stolen platinum card to fund it. That is exactly why they were locked out of their hotel room. I froze my accounts because I finally caught them stealing. I looked around the room. The fake high society friends and the internet influencers were staring at me in absolute horror. The glamorous illusion my family had so carefully constructed was completely disintegrating right in front of their eyes. People were slowly setting down their champagne glasses and backing away from the bar, desperate to distance themselves from the unfolding legal disaster. "This entire life is a mirage," I said, looking directly into Jasmine's terrified eyes. "You married a criminal, Jasmine. He used my money to buy your affection, and he used my stolen identity to secure the roof currently over your head. And because this lease is legally mine, I am exercising my right as the master tenant." I pulled a single sheet of paper from the very back of the binder and slid it across the marble island toward her. "It is an official 24-hour eviction notice," I stated coldly. "You and your fraud of a husband have exactly 1 day to pack your bags and vacate my property." Jasmine looked down at the eviction notice, her hands trembling violently. The gimbal shook, sending the live stream framing into a chaotic blur. The perfect aesthetic she sold to the internet was completely shattered. She slowly turned her head and looked across the room at Brandon. He was still standing near the bar, looking terrified. "Tell them she is lying," Jasmine demanded, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Brandon, tell everyone right now that she is lying. Prove you are exactly who you said you were." But Brandon just stood there. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He just stammered completely and entirely unable to even speak. Brandon's mouth opened and closed, but his terrified voice completely failed him. The arrogant, wealthy persona he had spent months building evaporated into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a terrified man who had finally been caught. Jasmine stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of absolute horror and mounting fury. She did not even need him to verbally confess. His paralyzing silence was all the confirmation she needed. The massive diamond on her finger suddenly felt like a heavy steel handcuff. I slid the single sheet of paper across the marble island until it bumped gently against her manicured hand. "Write it carefully," I instructed, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room. "As the sole legal leaseholder of this penthouse, I have already contacted the property management group. I officially terminated the lease agreement this morning. The document in front of you is a formal, legally binding 24-hour notice to vacate. By this time tomorrow, the building management will change all the electronic locks and deactivate your access fobs. If any of your belongings are still inside this apartment, they will be considered abandoned property and thrown directly into the dumpster." Jasmine picked up this paper with trembling fingers. The expensive camera gimbal in her other hand drooped toward the floor, but the live stream was still running, capturing every humiliating second of her downfall. "You cannot do this to me," she whispered, her voice cracking as the terrifying reality of her impending homelessness sank in. "We have nowhere else to go. You are throwing us out onto the street." "I am not throwing you anywhere," I corrected her sharply. "You chose to live inside a stolen fantasy. I am simply reclaiming my identity. You can go live with my parents in the suburbs. Oh wait, you cannot do that either because they illegally borrowed against their house to pay for your lavish lifestyle and are currently facing massive bank foreclosure." I slowly turned my attention away from the devastated bride and looked directly at the crowd standing frozen in my living room. Some of them were still awkwardly holding champagne flutes. Others had pulled out their phones and were recording the chaotic scene, eager to capture the viral drama. "As for the rest of you," I announced loudly, "this housewarming party is officially over. You are currently standing inside my private residence without my explicit permission. Therefore, every single one of you is legally trespassing. I strongly suggest you put your drinks down and head toward the lobby elevator right now before I have the building security forcibly escort you out of the grand lobby." The effect was absolutely instantaneous. The collective illusion shattered completely. The fake high society friends immediately began murmuring amongst themselves, hurriedly setting their glasses down on whatever flat surfaces they could find. A few panicked people grabbed their expensive designer coats from the entryway closet and sprinted toward the door, eager to escape the massive legal disaster. The glamorous housewarming event had instantly transformed into a humiliating evacuation. But not everyone was ready to quietly leave the premises. From the far corner of the living room, near the custom floral installation, a sudden shriek of pure rage tore through the air. "You vindictive little witch," my mother screamed at the top of her lungs. Brenda shoved her way violently through the dispersing crowd, her face twisted into a mask of absolute hatred. She had been watching her entire master plan unravel in real time, and the public humiliation had finally pushed her over the edge of sanity. She did not care about the live stream. She only saw me standing there dismantling her golden child's perfect life. She lunged at me, her hands raised like claws, fully intending to physically attack me right there in the middle of the kitchen. She screamed that I was destroying our family. I did not flinch. I did not even take a single step backward. Before Brenda could close the final 5 feet between us, 2 tall figures emerged rapidly from the shadows of the foyer. Detective Harris and his partner moved with blinding speed. They stepped directly in front of me, forming an impenetrable human wall. Harris caught my mother by the wrist, stopping her violent momentum instantly. She let out a shocked gasp, trying desperately to yank her arm away from his iron grip. "Let go of me right now," she shrieked, kicking wildly. "Do you know who I am?" "We know exactly who you are, Brenda," Detective Harris said, his voice dropping into a cold register that commanded absolute silence. He reached into his jacket pocket, flipping open his leather wallet to reveal the gleaming silver shield of the Chicago Police Department. "And you are under arrest." Detective Harris smoothly turned my mother around, pressing her arms firmly behind her back with practiced, undeniable efficiency. The sharp, metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs, locking securely around her wrists, sounded exactly like a gunshot, echoing over the dead silence of the penthouse living room. Brenda gasped, her chest heaving as she looked down at her restrained hands. Her eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated disbelief. The 50 guests remaining in the room stood completely frozen, their mouths agape, watching the arrogant matriarch of our family being treated like a common street criminal. And right in the center of the chaotic scene, Jasmine's smartphone was still actively recording, broadcasting the entire humiliating arrest to thousands of eager viewers across the internet. "This is a massive mistake," my mother shrieked, her voice cracking as she finally found her words. She violently thrashed her shoulders, trying to shake off the firm grip of the detective. "I did not do anything wrong. I am her mother. You cannot arrest a mother for simply helping her son out of a financial bind. She is the one lying to you. Megan is a jealous, spiteful liar who set us up because she hates seeing her brother happy." But Detective Harris remained completely unfazed by her frantic, desperate gaslighting. He calmly began reading her Miranda rights, his deep voice carrying clearly over her pathetic protests. "You have the right to remain silent," he recited, staring straight ahead as he secured his hold on her arm. He then casually listed the federal charges, including aggravated identity theft and multi-state wire fraud, making absolutely sure the entire room understood the severe gravity of her crimes. While my mother was causing a massive, embarrassing scene in the center of the living room, I noticed a sudden flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. My father, Thomas, the man who had always enabled her toxic behavior and silently endorsed my financial abuse for decades, was quietly backing away toward the kitchen corridor. He was desperately trying to slip out through the private service elevator in the back. He honestly thought he could abandon his wife to the authorities and save his own skin, just like he always did when family situations got difficult. But he did not even make it to the hallway. Agent Reynolds stepped smoothly out from behind the massive custom refrigerator, completely blocking my father's escape route. "Where exactly do you think you are going, Thomas?" The federal agent asked, his tone deceptively polite, but entirely unyielding. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a second set of heavy steel handcuffs. "You are named as a primary co-conspirator on the fraudulent secondary mortgage documents and the home equity line of credit. You are not going anywhere except a federal holding cell." My father's shoulders slumped in instant miserable defeat. He did not fight back. He did not try to argue his innocence. He simply held his hands out, his face pale and completely devoid of the arrogant entitlement he had so proudly displayed in their dining room just a few days prior. The metallic click of his cuffs, joining my mother's, sealed their fate. The sight of both my parents standing in my luxury kitchen in police custody was the final breaking point for the remaining party guests. The fake influencers and wealthy socialites practically trampled over each other to get to the main lobby elevator. They were absolutely terrified of being associated with an active federal raid. The massive room cleared out in less than a minute, leaving behind half-empty champagne flutes, shattered glass on the marble floor, and the undeniable reality of my family's complete and total destruction. Only Jasmine, Brandon, the federal agents, and I remained in the penthouse. Detective Harris began physically leading my mother toward the front door. As she was being pulled away from the kitchen island, she dug the heels of her expensive shoes into the imported hardwood floor. She forcefully twisted her head to look directly at her golden child. "Brandon, do something," she screamed, her voice raw, panicked, and desperate. "Be a man. Tell them it was all a huge misunderstanding. Make your sister call off these dogs right now. Do not just stand there and let them take your parents away to prison." Brandon stared at our mother, his chest heaving with rapid, panicked breaths. He looked at the federal agents, then at the formal eviction notice sitting on the marble counter, and finally at Jasmine, who was staring at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The illusion of his power and wealth was entirely gone. He had no money, no legal leverage, and absolutely no way out of the nightmare he had created. Instead of stepping forward to defend his mother like the man she demanded he be, Brandon completely shattered. His knees hit the hard marble floor with a loud, pathetic thud. He buried his face in his hands and began sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, Megan." He begged, his voice trembling as tears streamed down his face. "I will do whatever you want. I will sign whatever you need. Just withdraw the charges. Please do not let me lose my wife." I stood looking down at my brother, feeling absolutely nothing but cold indifference. I did not offer him a single word of comfort. His desperate pleas echoed through the hollow silence of the penthouse, pathetic and entirely useless. He was begging me to save a marriage built entirely on stolen money. I slowly shifted my gaze from the sobbing man on the floor to the woman he was so terrified of losing. Jasmine was no longer looking at him with the adoring eyes of a newlywed. The expression on her face was a terrifying mixture of pure revulsion and calculating panic. She looked at the federal agents leading my parents toward the heavy double doors, then down at the eviction notice resting on the marble island. The reality of her situation had finally crystallized. She had not married a wealthy real estate heir. She had married a broke, unemployed criminal who was about to be federally indicted. Brandon reached out a trembling hand, trying to grab the hem of her expensive designer dress. "Jasmine, please," he choked out between heavy sobs. "We can fix this. I love you. We will figure it out together." Jasmine did not reach down to comfort him. Instead, she took a sharp step back as if his touch was physically diseased. "Do not touch me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with absolute hysteria. Her grip on her smartphone gimbal tightened until her knuckles turned completely white. "You are completely broke. You have absolutely nothing. This entire apartment, the wedding, the cars, everything was a complete lie. You made me look like an absolute fool in front of millions of people." Brandon tried to stand up, his hands raised in a desperate gesture of surrender. "Baby, please listen to me. I only did it because I wanted to give you the life you deserve." He did not even get to finish his sentence. Jasmine swung her free hand back and slapped him directly across the face with everything she had. The sharp, explosive crack of her palm striking his cheek echoed loudly off the floor to ceiling windows. Brandon stumbled backward, clutching his face in complete shock. "I want an annulment!" Jasmine screamed, her chest heaving as she pointed a shaking finger right at his face. "I am calling a lawyer the second I walk out of this building. I am completely wiping you from my life. You are a disgusting fraud, and I am absolutely done with you." Brandon crumpled back down onto the floor, utterly destroyed. He buried his face in his hands, weeping loudly as the federal agents finally moved in, securing his arms behind his back and snapping a third pair of steel handcuffs onto his wrists. Jasmine did not even blink as they hauled her brand-new husband to his feet and began reading him his rights. Her survival instincts had completely taken over. She looked down at her smartphone. The live stream was still broadcasting. The viewer count had skyrocketed into the tens of thousands. The comment section was a rapid blur of shock, mockery, and outrage. Jasmine knew her carefully curated influencer brand was currently going up in flames. She needed to immediately pivot the narrative to save whatever was left of her career. She took a deep breath, wiped a single tear from her cheek, and looked directly into the camera. "You guys are witnessing exactly what I have been dealing with," Jasmine said to her audience, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "I was manipulated. I was lied to by this entire family. I am a victim of their toxic financial abuse just like anyone else. I had absolutely no idea the money was stolen. I am completely devastated." She then turned off the live stream, ending the broadcast abruptly. The room was suddenly very quiet, save for the sound of Brandon sniffling as Detective Harris escorted him toward the front door. Jasmine slowly turned her attention back to me. Her demeanor shifted instantly from a devastated bride to a calculating opportunist. She walked over to the marble island, keeping a safe distance, and looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Megan," she began, her voice soft and entirely stripped of the arrogant venom she had used just 10 minutes prior. "I know we have had our differences. I know I said some horrible things online, but you have to understand they lied to me too. I am completely innocent in all of this, and now I have absolutely nowhere to live. My brand is ruined. I have to move all my equipment and my belongings out of here by tomorrow." She paused, taking a step closer, actually trying to look sympathetic. "You clearly have your life together. You have the corporate job, the money, the real penthouse. Since you are getting all your money back anyway, do you think you could help me out? Just a small wire transfer to cover my moving expenses and a deposit on a new place. It is the least you could do since your family dragged me into this massive nightmare." I stared at her, completely processing the sheer magnitude of her delusion. She had publicly slandered me, accused me of racism to millions of people, and happily spent my stolen money, and now she was asking me to fund her relocation. I looked Jasmine up and down, a genuine cold smile spreading across my face, and I began to laugh at the absolute audacity. I laughed, a deep, resonant laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of the penthouse. Jasmine blinked, taking a small step backward, clearly unnerved by my reaction. "You actually want me to write you a check?" I asked, my amusement quickly hardening into pure, unadulterated contempt. "You want the woman whose financial identity was just stolen to officially sponsor your luxury relocation expenses?" I took a deliberate step toward her, the smile completely vanishing from my face. "Let us talk about that viral video you posted on Tuesday, Jasmine. The one where you sat in a cheap airport hotel in a gray hoodie and cried to 2 million people. You looked directly into the camera lens and called me a jealous, bitter workaholic. But you did not stop there, did you? You intentionally weaponized your race and your massive platform. You told your audience that I was a wealthy, racist tyrant who maliciously cut off your credit cards just to put an African-American woman in her place." Jasmine swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward the federal agents who were still processing my parents near the entryway. "Megan, please," she whispered frantically, holding her hands up defensively. "You have to understand how the internet works today. I was just trying to protect my personal brand. My followers expect a certain narrative from me. I was incredibly angry and stressed out about being stranded. I did not mean any of those horrible things I said." "Oh, I understand exactly how the internet works," I replied coldly, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I understand that your carefully crafted little narrative resulted in my corporate employer being swarmed by an angry digital mob demanding my immediate termination. I understand that my personal inbox was flooded with graphic, violent death threats from your loyal fans. You tried to completely destroy my career, my reputation, and my life just to save face online. And now you have the absolute nerve to stand in my apartment and expect me to hand you a security deposit." Jasmine opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off instantly. "But the viral smear campaign is actually the least of your problems right now." I continued, my voice dropping to a low, authoritative register. "Do you remember our lovely FaceTime call while you were lounging in that oceanfront cabana in Maui? Do you remember when I explicitly told you to enjoy the beach because it was the last luxury you would see?" Jasmine nodded slowly, a look of genuine confusion crossing her tear-stained face. When I made that statement, I officially put you on notice, I explained, crossing my arms over my chest. I informed you that the funds you were currently using were compromised, but instead of immediately packing your bags and reporting the fraud, what exactly did you do? You walked straight into a high-end boutique and tried to purchase a $5,000 diamond watch with my stolen platinum card. You knowingly attempted to utilize fraudulent funds after being explicitly warned by the actual account holder. The color completely drained from Jasmine's face. She looked over my shoulder at Agent Reynolds, the IRS investigator who was quietly observing our entire exchange with intense professional interest. "And that is exactly where your massive legal problem begins," I said, gesturing toward the federal agent. "Because you knowingly participated in the enjoyment of stolen funds across state lines, you are no longer just an innocent victimized bride. You are a potential accessory to federal wire fraud. And because you frequently accept expensive promotional gifts, luxury hotel stays, and high-end clothing for your influencer business, the IRS is incredibly interested in your personal finances." Jasmine let out a sharp, terrified gasp. "Agent Reynolds here is going to initiate a comprehensive multi-year federal audit of your entire influencer income," I told her, delivering the final crushing blow. "Every single sponsored post, every free vacation, every gifted designer bag you never declared on your taxes is about to be scrutinized by the federal government. You are not getting a single dime from me, Jasmine. You should probably save whatever loose change you have left to hire a very good federal defense attorney." The reality of her total destruction finally hit her. The carefully constructed influencer facade completely evaporated. Jasmine let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She dropped her expensive smartphone onto the marble floor. The screen shattered instantly, a perfect physical metaphor for her ruined career. She fell to her knees, sobbing violently, pulling at her own hair in a state of absolute, unhinged panic. She suddenly spun around, her terror immediately transforming into blinding rage directed at the people who had dragged her into this nightmare. She lunged toward Brandon, who was currently being hoisted to his feet by Detective Harris. "You ruined my life!" Jasmine shrieked at him, her voice tearing through the apartment. "I hate you. I wish I never met you." My mother, currently being escorted out the front door, screamed back at Jasmine, calling her a gold-digging parasite. Brandon sobbed louder, begging Jasmine to forgive him, while simultaneously pleading with the detectives not to push him so hard. My father simply hung his head in absolute shame as the handcuffs clinked heavily against his wrists. I stood there for a brief moment, watching the sheer chaotic destruction of the toxic family unit that had abused me for my entire life. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt entirely liberated. I turned my back on the screaming, hysterical mess. I calmly walked out the heavy double doors of the penthouse, stepped into the waiting private elevator, and left them all behind to face the federal authorities. 3 months passed since that chaotic night in the penthouse. The federal justice system had taken over, methodically dismantling the lies my family constructed. For the first time in my entire life, my phone was completely silent. There were no manipulative voicemails, no demands for cash, and no guilt trips. I simply went to work every day and let the elite corporate lawyers from my firm handle the communication with the prosecutor. The legal aftermath was devastating for them, but unfolded exactly according to strict financial laws. Because I filed the official Federal Trade Commission identity theft report, immediately my personal liability was completely erased. The massive banking institutions conducted their mandatory internal investigations and reached the undeniable conclusion that I was a victim. The $65,000 wedding loan and the drained home equity lines of credit were entirely wiped from my Social Security number. My credit score rebounded to its original pristine state. I did not owe a single dime of the $365,000 debt. That massive financial burden did not just disappear into the ether. It fell squarely back onto the shoulders of the people who actually signed the fraudulent documents. Without my immaculate credit profile to prop them up, Brenda and Thomas completely collapsed under the crushing weight of their own greed. The bank immediately initiated foreclosure proceedings on their sprawling suburban colonial house. The property was seized, the locks were changed, and my parents were legally evicted from the home they had illegally borrowed against. They were forced to pack whatever belongings they could fit into a rented van and move into a cramped, dingy one-bedroom apartment situated right next to a noisy interstate highway. The criminal proceedings were equally swift. Brenda was terrified of facing a federal jury trial with the overwhelming digital evidence and the recorded audio confession I had handed over to the authorities. She ultimately accepted a harsh plea deal to avoid spending years inside a federal penitentiary. The judge sentenced her to 3 years of strict federal probation and ordered massive financial restitution. Every month, a significant portion of her meager paycheck is automatically garnished by the court to slowly pay back the hundreds of thousands of dollars she stole. Thomas, who narrowly avoided his own felony conviction by cooperating with the investigators, drained his entire retirement pension just to pay their exorbitant legal defense fees. They are trapped in a miserable life of poverty, completely isolated from the extended family who cut all ties after the horrific truth came out. But the absolute hardest fall belonged to the golden child. Brandon was utterly destroyed. Without my stolen platinum cards to fund his expensive illusion, he was exposed as a 30-year-old man with absolutely zero assets, no education, and no marketable skills. The luxury SUV was repossessed from the apartment garage the very next morning. His expensive designer suits and watches were liquidated to pay for a cheap bankruptcy lawyer. He officially filed for Chapter 7, bankruptcy permanently destroying his own financial future. The man who loved to play the role of a wealthy corporate heir is now working 40 hours a week, wearing a polyester uniform at a local fast food drive-through window. I drove past the restaurant once on my way to a client meeting. Seeing him hand a greasy paper bag through the window to a customer was the ultimate confirmation that the universe has a perfect sense of irony. As for his bride, Jasmine wasted absolutely no time severing her ties to the sinking ship. She immediately hired a ruthless family law attorney and filed for a legal annulment on the grounds of severe financial fraud and misrepresentation. Because Brandon had lied about his identity and his assets to secure the marriage, the judge granted the annulment in record time. Legally, their lavish wedding never even existed. But Jasmine did not escape the nightmare unscathed. The live stream she foolishly broadcasted during the federal raid became a permanent fixture of internet pop culture. The video of her hysterical meltdown went insanely viral across every social media platform. Jasmine became a walking punchline. Every major corporate sponsor immediately dropped her, terrified of the massive public relations disaster. Beauty brands canceled her contracts, and her influencer management agency officially terminated her representation. To make matters infinitely worse, Agent Reynolds from the IRS kept his promise. The federal tax audit uncovered tens of thousands of dollars in undeclared luxury gifts, sponsored trips, and promotional income. She was hit with crippling tax penalties and massive fines she could not pay. The glamorous lifestyle blogger who once mocked me for working a corporate job is now completely bankrupt, desperately trying to sell her used designer clothes online just to afford her rent. It is a quiet Sunday morning. I am sitting on the expansive balcony of my Gold Coast penthouse, the exact same apartment my brother tried to steal to fund his pathetic illusion. The crisp morning breeze rolling off Lake Michigan feels incredibly refreshing against my skin. I have a hot cup of black coffee resting on the glass table beside me, and a thick, heavily redacted dossier for a brand new corporate fraud case resting securely on my lap. Life has finally moved on. The profound silence inside my home is no longer a strategic, calculated maneuver to force my family into a panic. It is simply peace. It is the quiet, uninterrupted tranquility of a life completely unburdened by toxic obligations. I flip open the heavy manila folder and begin reviewing the bank logs of my newest target. It is another wealthy corporate executive desperately trying to hide embezzled company funds in offshore shell accounts. It is a highly complex financial puzzle, but my mind is sharp-focused and entirely clear. For so many years, a massive portion of my mental energy was constantly siphoned off by the exhausting anxiety of managing my family. I was always bracing myself for the next fabricated emergency, the next aggressive demand for cash, the next expertly delivered guilt trip from my mother. I had built an absolute fortress around my career and my finances, but I had foolishly left the front door wide open for the people who happened to share my last name. Closing that door and locking it permanently, with the full undeniable force of the federal government, was the single most liberating action I have ever taken in my entire life. Society constantly conditions women from a very young age to be the ultimate peacemakers within the family unit. We are implicitly told to be the bigger person, to let things slide, and to prioritize household harmony over our own personal boundaries. When a golden child son fails, the successful daughter is often fully expected to quietly absorb the financial and emotional impact. We are told to act as the permanent safety net, and if you refuse to play that role, you are immediately labeled cold, selfish, and bitter. Jasmine tried to use those exact toxic buzzwords against me to rally an internet mob. My mother tried to completely weaponize my hard-earned independence, acting as if my corporate salary was a communal family asset she was inherently entitled to distribute as she saw fit. They rely entirely on the heavy, suffocating blanket of family loyalty to cover up their blatant, targeted abuse. But financial abuse is not a quirky personality flaw or a simple family misunderstanding. It is a calculated, devastating crime. The exact moment you allow someone to use your social security number without your explicit permission just to keep the peace, you are not saving your family. You are actively funding your own destruction. You are giving them the tools to dismantle your future piece by piece. People occasionally ask me, usually in hushed, highly judgmental tones, if I feel any lingering guilt about how everything concluded. They wonder how a daughter could possibly sleep soundly at night, knowing her own mother is wearing a federal probation monitor and living in a tiny, noisy rental apartment. They wonder how I could simply stand by and watch my brother hit absolute rock bottom and file for bankruptcy. My answer is always exactly the same. I feel absolutely zero guilt. I did not forge a signature on a $65,000 loan. I did not cross state lines with stolen credit cards to fund a luxury vacation. I did not lie to a federal judge or steal $300,000 in home equity. I simply stopped protecting criminals from the natural legal consequences of their own incredibly arrogant actions. Sending my mother to federal court was not a petty act of revenge. It was an act of profound self-respect. I worked entirely too hard, studied through too many sleepless nights, and sacrificed too much to let my financial identity be hijacked by people who only ever valued me for my high credit limit. The blood running through our veins does not grant anyone a free pass to commit federal felonies. DNA is just biology. It's not a license to destroy my credit score. Have you ever had to use the law to establish boundaries with toxic parents? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe and always lock your credit.